Okay, cool. Well, I will give an intro to our speaker, Jay Blazek Crossley. I'm going to read off his LinkedIn. I hope that's okay. He is the executive director of Farm and City, a nonprofit dedicated to high quality urban and rural human habitat in Texas in perpetuity. Crossley has a master's in public affairs from the LBJ School at UT Austin and 15 years of experience changing policies to provide affordable access to safe, walkable urbanism connected by high quality transit. Among other roles, he serves as chair of Austin's Pedestrian Advisory Council and on the Texas Strategic Highway Safety Plan Stakeholder Group. Crossley contributed significantly to Houston Complete Streets policy, Houston Metro's new bus network, Austin Cap Metro's Cap Remap, and Plan Houston. And I will say, if there is one person who understands the power structures involved in transportation in Texas and can help us come up with a plan to change them, I think that's going to be Jay. So glad to have you here, Jay. Let you take it.
Well, hi everybody. Thanks so much, Neil, and everybody. I have some slides, and but I don't have all the answers, kind of thing. And I've thought about, like, I think it will be useful for me to just keep a bunch of slides and a bunch of but they're not the answer or something like that. Like solving this I-45 project for the people of Houston, it requires the people of Houston, kind of thing. And it requires all of you being engaged. And so hopefully what I'm going to contribute is just some ideas, some ways to think about things. And before I get into this slide, I-45 is a failed transportation project. It kills a bunch of people all the time. And it's one of the most dangerous transportation systems in America is I-45. And we have to fix it. And I don't believe that leaving I-45 the way it is an acceptable solution. And I believe that XDOT can fix I-45 and make it safe for the people of Houston. And that's where I hope we will go. So just but the massive amount of traffic deaths and crashes happen on I-45 is kind of the context that I think about all this. So one thing I think is important is, like, I think what the people of Texas and the people of Houston think about transportation doesn't seem to boil up to the decisions that we make on these kind of things. And so this is just one example. In the city of Austin did a survey where they asked people, like, so here was, how would you like to move around? And the plurality, the strongest answer was, I wish I could move around by public transportation. But then this is the reality in Austin, and so 42% of people wish they could get around by public transit, and 4% actually do. And so our transportation has failed us. Our system doesn't provide what we all want. And so I think that's the context that we can ask TxDOT to make this project better. And there's some Houston area. The Kinder Houston area survey is the most amazing survey of residents of a metro region. And if you look at the Kinder Houston area survey, people want transit, and people want communities where people live close to work. And a sort of minority want expanding highways. And so I think that we should work towards these kind of public decisions, trying to do what the people want and trying to connect the people and improve transit and those kind of things. And the context we're all sitting in is that Texas is in a radical, what I call transit austerity measures. And Houston is in the 25 largest U.S. metro regions. Detroit and Tampa are the only metro regions that have less transit funding per GDP. And so, like, the current amount of transit access that you have, the current amount of bus, the frequency of the bus that comes for you or rail, is sort of radically crappy. and that's the context we're in. And so this is a different way to show the same thing. A key there is that our state funding for transit is zero. There is zero dedicated state funding for transit for our major metros in Texas. And we are unique in that. Ohio was the other state with large metro areas that also had zero state funding for transit, except for last year they raised their gas tax, and I think they raised their gas tax 5 cents, and 1 cent of it is dedicated to transit. So we are now unique. We are the only state in the country with no dedicated state funding for transit in our major metros, or no, the state doesn't allow local options funding for transit. So that's where we are. And I guess the point of this slide and the next slide is that transit funding seems kind of correlated with transit ridership, and we are not we are not in a place where Texas transit agencies and Houston Metro suck. Like Houston Metro does a really good job. They just have barely any money compared to their competitors, compared to other cities. And so, in theory, if we were to have more transit funding in Texas, more people would ride transit. However, we are spending crazy amounts of money on roads, and this was based on the an old tip, the HGAC's tip, but I assume it's probably true. But basically, the Houston region is spending more money on roads than like any other region, and so we're. It's not like we're being cheap, and it's not like we're being fiscally responsible or something. We're spending tons of money on transportation, and that money isn't coming from user fees. And there's a whole myth that like transit users or people using bike lanes and whatever are subsidized, and it's just not true. And in driving in Texas is heavily subsidized, and so this is total spending on building new roads or maintaining roads in Texas per capita. And like the great legacy of Rick Perry and Greg Abbott will be this, that we moved from being a kind of pay-as-you-go transportation system. And also in 2000, Texas essentially was like at zero in terms of debt for transportation. And there was a pay-as-you-go concept. And Rick Perry changed that. And Greg Abbott has continued that. And so we now are heavily, TxDOT is in debt. I think it's $30 billion in debt or something. And the money paying for that transportation is not coming from the users. So property taxes and income taxes are paying for this driving. And the governor has said publicly that Texas is done building highways. And he said, except for once Bug, being Chairman Bruce Bug, who's the chair of the Texas Transportation Commission, when he's done with this current round of expanding highways, that's it, and we will never build highways again. And so the question is when is that point? When do we stop? And we could stop now. TxDOT, and this is a whole section about how we can imagine scenario planning. We can imagine different futures for Texas and for Houston. And TxDOT did this whole process with their Texas Transportation Plan 2050. And they entertained this idea of reliably connect Texas communities, and to really dramatically shift the way we invest in transportation. And the stakeholders preferred that scenario. And I guess they ended up with some kind of this bottom thing where they say that people want to spend money on roads. But in terms of the total amount of people, more people supported the safe multimodal Texas than any of the other options.
Jay, I'm so sorry. Can you turn off your camera just while you're presenting? Because sometimes the sound's being a little funky.
I don't know.
Get all. Cool. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So one, our gas tax is very, very low. And in terms, 85% of Americans live in these 10 states. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. Maybe it's 75. But we have the lowest gas tax. And so that's essentially we're subsidizing driving, and a gas tax is a carbon tax. And so we are choosing not to have a carbon tax. Then the context of all these decisions are wildly inequitable. And we've done a lot of work looking at the HGAC Transportation Policy Council. And so this is one slide of if you're a white male, how overrepresented are you on that council versus if you're a Asian woman. And that's part of the problem, is that the decision-making entities that get to decide these things don't represent the people of Houston. And we developed this whole mess of male advantage index, white advantage index, and geographic advantage index. And Houston won. Houston was the most inequitable in terms of regional MPO decision making. uh, in Texas. And that's basically continues today. There are, it's important to note, I guess, that there are women who have had strong voices at the HGAC table in the last couple years that didn't exist 5 years ago, basically. But however, the actual votes are wildly inequitable, and the way for a normal, like, to explain it to a normal person is the difference between the Senate and the House, and that the way the House of Representatives works is it's like one person, one vote, whereas the way the Senate works is if one state, one vote, and that basically the Houston Galveston Area Council it works like a Senate, where one government, one vote. And so a county like Austin County with 40,000 people has the same vote, has one vote, whereas Harris County with 4 million people also has 1 or 2 votes. And so that those kind of inequities are part of this. Houston has explored scenario planning, and the Houston Galveston Area Council has tried sometimes to explore this stuff. Back from this slide, I don't know if I can explain the whole thing, but basically, in every way, a compact, connected urban growth package would be better for the people of Houston. But we chose not to do that. And the Houston Galveston Area Council has explored this whole concept of less time on the road and a greener region. But like, this is the real problem. Like, the real question is, like, where is the growth going to happen? And is it going to happen in sprawl or not? And that our regional planning and all of our assumptions at the regional level assume that we're going to sprawl. And then if you assume we're going to sprawl, then you have to build the freeways to sprawl. But that we don't have to do that. And TxDOT now has the capability to entertain different future scenarios. And so TxDOT presented this SWIFT thing to the HGAC Transportation Policy Council, but then very specifically said, this is only for our, like, we shouldn't actually use this for real decision making. We should only use it for our, like, internally. And we should call them on that and say, no, you should use this for just, like, you should use this to help guide the decisions on I-45. And so they have this tool that can, like, entertain different future scenarios in terms of, like, where people will live, how they will travel, and how that travel, like, how much everything costs. And so in the HGAC and transportation world, you end up with these kind of things, where you look at a baseline scenario and then various other scenarios, and see what the impacts are. And this is from Austin. This is like a study on arterial management or something. Anyway, the point is, we can entertain these kind of scenarios, and with an I-45, we can entertain different future scenarios, and we can say, what does it mean if people live, if we end up in the future with a bunch of people living in sprawl and blah blah blah, or if we live where not so many people live in sprawl and more people live in compact walkable neighborhoods. And TechStot has not done that, and like entertaining this kind of different scenarios hasn't been done in this I-45 process. That throughout the whole process, they have stuck to one future forecast for I-45 and said, like, we assume the people of the Houston region, which will grow from 7.5 million to 11 million, we assume they're going to sprawl and they're all going to live out in the middle of nowhere, and thus they're going to need to drive. And they have not entertained the concept that you might instead have people live in the existing urban areas, and people might actually be close to stuff and not have to drive as much. So finally, if you just look at the travel on I-45, it hasn't really changed very much in 15 years. And like, so what are we doing? Like, what's the whole point? Like, in recent years, in the last 10 years, travel's been going down. The amount of cars on I-45 has actually been going down. And so that makes sense that the Houston region has changed and people don't drive as much. And we don't need to build this darn freeway. And then a final note is there's this concept about regional planning that it really made an impression on me. And is your regional planning colonizing the future or empowering the future? And I think that the way the Houston region does regional planning is colonizing the future. It's requiring the way a bunch of people in power right now think things should be. We want to keep them that way. And there's a lot of like elite projection kind of stuff. And so like, whereas where our regional planning instead could empower the people of the region to realize the world they want. And so there's this elite projection of like, do you want Elon Musk's like tunnels where we all drive in cars by ourselves? Or do we want like magic Uber flying cars, which will never ever serve the people of Texas? Or do we want Wakanda? Do we want like a sustainable urban place? And I think our regional planning processes have to stop colonizing our future and have to start entertaining the idea that the people of Houston actually have good ideas about how they want to live and what they want in their future. And the final thought is there's a long debate about whether or not I-45 is the widest freeway in the world. The freeway you see on the top here is in China, but it's a toll station. And this freeway actually shrinks down to like a 6-lane freeway right outside of the station. Nevertheless, the current plans, the EIS for 45 would top it. And so if we build I-45 the way we've talked about, it would be the widest freeway in the world. And so whatever that means. And the Federal Highway Administration supports sort of this kind of thinking about scenario planning, and maybe I should stop there. But the point being, we should entertain we should entertain the scenario of maybe we'll keep sprawling like we have, or maybe we'll build equitable transit-oriented development. or maybe we'll have some kind of balance. And our metrics, TxDOT should understand how all of those scenarios would impact our transportation system, and we should entertain different assumptions on our travel demand models, and then we should entertain different assumptions on what kind of project we build on I-45. And we should do all of that. And the TxDOT should be able to entertain all this stuff and like to consider the idea that things are complicated and we might have very different scenarios. So that was a big old mess of everything I had to say.